Um, we would like to welcome you to join us for our explorations at the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival.
Rachel, we're doing the intro first.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Thank you. Finally, now we would like to welcome you to join us for our explorations at the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival. I'm Rachel Schaff of the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival, now in its 26th year. Our festival theme is Polyphonies. We acknowledge that we are mounting this festival and convening our communities together for discussion within context beyond Ithaca. We ask you to remember that the 2023 festival takes place as global climate catastrophe intensifies, as the Russian war in Ukraine continues, as polarizations about race, gender, sexualities, nations, politics, land, air, and water deepen across the globe, and as people across the world endure violence and disease, yet continue to fight for democracy, equality, freedom of expression, and a livable planet. Ithaca is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayokono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayokono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. We acknowledge the painful history of the Gayokono disposition and honor the ongoing connection of the Gayokono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. In the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival, the world is our why.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leah Schaefer. I'm the associate producer of this event. Polyphonies joyously layer different voices, practices, and perspectives across the arts, politics, and technologies and ecologies. We are honored that you have joined us today for this event. We invite you to use the Zoom rename feature to rename yourself with your physical location after your name. Our event will begin with the speakers in conversation with each other, and then we will open the floor to your questions. During the Q&A, please use the Zoom raise hand feature, which you can access by clicking the reaction smiley face at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand when you have a question. It is with great pleasure that I now introduce today's speakers, Judith Aston, co-founder of IDOCS and an associate professor in film and digital arts at the University of the West England in Bristol, and Reece Auguiste, chair and associate professor of critical media practices at the University of Colorado. Welcome.
Hey. Hi, everybody. My name is Reece Auguiste, and I'm very happy to be here and participating in this event and to be in conversation with Dr. Judith Aston on polyphonic documentary practices or the Polyphonic Documentary Project. That said, I will now ask Dr. Aston to do a very brief overview of Polyphonic Documentary Project, and then after this, we'll get into a conversation, which will be followed by a Q&A. And having said that, also please keep your questions very brief if possible, because we want to be very inclusive and have as many polyphonic voices as possible in this space. So Dr. Aston.
Thank you, Reece, and thank you. I can't think of a better conference to be talking about this project in, and a better person to be in a conversation with than Reece. So it's a real pleasure. So I'm going to share my screen and just give you an introduction to the project. So it is the Polyphonic Documentary Project, but I've added an S to reflect the polyphonies theme of this festival. And it works with our project because we are making multiple small media interventions with collective bodies of material that we've been gathering within this project. So there are multiple outcomes. So Polyphonic Documentary Projects works. The project's convened by myself and Stefano Odorico, who's here in the audience. It's just me talking today because for a conversation, it makes more sense one-to-one, and there's not a lot of time. So we are conveners of this project. That's very important because the idea is it's collaborative, even dare I say it, co-creative. I'll explain why it's co-creative in a bit. But we're trying to work in a non-hierarchical way, genuinely collaborative. So this is a key quote that we keep returning to from an author, a novelist. So a lot of kind of experiments with narrative happening in the fiction realm, not so much in filmmaking nowadays, but our intervention is to work with film to try and do something about that. And so this idea that we lack ready narratives, not only for the future, but even for the concrete now, for the ultra rapid transformations of today's world is really important to us. And we ask, what if the form is part of the problem? So we are exploring narratives, not based in consumption and extraction, talk a lot about extractive forms in documentary making. We're trying to go beyond, the idea of dramatic narratives and the idea of conflict that's baked into so many filmmaking practices. We're building on the tradition of experimental film to explore new ways of approaching polyphonic and transformative narratives that we think are needed, not to replace dramatic narratives, but to sit alongside, and that we need these ways of thinking and ways of working with film and documentary, given the current situation that the world is in. So we started this project, started really thinking about this formally in 2018 at our IDOC symposium. That's myself and Stefano. We convened a panel on the poetics and politics of polyphony. We did a special issue of Alphaville Screen Journal, and that we edited that, and that pulled together various colleagues. I saw Amir Husak, I just saw he was there, and other people probably are here as well who contributed to this. That's available online, as is that talk. And then we launched the project with an IDOCS community conversation in the pandemic, where we kind of introduced a lot of the ideas and concepts. That's also available to watch on the IDOCS website. And then recently I've written an article resetting the interactive documentary field, revisiting an article I wrote with Sandra in 2012, and resetting the field very much with climate crisis and with problems of ideological polarization in mind. And they're the two things that we're really drilling into. And that's also available online, by the way. So the ideological polarization and climate crisis are the two things that we're really exploring through this project. So that's the website. You can find out more about the project. There's blog posts. This is not a massively funded project. We're doing it as and when, and we're doing it within the IDOCS community. There's about 70 of us online on Discord, where we share ideas and practices. And then at any one time, there's about 30 of us that are actually making collective, collaborative, creative interventions. So, updates on those interventions will appear on the blog in the fullness of time. We are co-creating because we are within our own community. So we are a collective of people who, with a shared understanding about interactive documentary and a shared interest in polyphony. So we're using interactive forms to develop these ideas. We're testing out ideas. It's really low tech. We're not making it for anyone else. We're making it for ourselves. We're using mobile devices. It's a trigger to start conversations, to sort of look at how we might shift our own practices and thinking in relation to the more than human, in relation to the polarizing practices that are happening, within social media as well, what we can do and how we can get back to some of the basics of thinking around interactive documentary and what contribution it might make to developing alternative approaches to narrative. So we're creating a community of makers with a theoretical underpinning and a practical approach. We're doing that through collective reading, collective sharing of projects and practices, and collective work with different authoring tools. And it's all online, so people involved are literally from all over the world, and we meet, as and when. And Bakhtin is our starting point, it's not our end point, but he wrote about the polyphonic novel, and we're looking at the relevance, what we can take from his ideas. I mean, major thinker of the 20th century. You know, what we can take from those ideas of relevance into our thinking around polyphony and interactive documentary. And Reece and I will talk more about that. But in essence, we're amplifying multiple voices, multiple perspectives, and we're working with multiple windows, platforms, and screens. And as we know, that's not the panacea. You know, we're trying to take a critical approach to this, you know, and working through ideas together. So dialogism, not monologism, is a key thing. We're trying to break from the monologic view of the director in filmmaking, and we're trying to give more voices, but we're still recognizing authorship within that. But we'll talk more about that later. We're working with two tools at the moment. Korsakoff, invented by Florian Talhofer. I saw his name pop up today, where narratives are naturally non-linear. His software is algorithmic. We've been putting out calls asking people to submit 3 to 5 short clips on a theme. This theme was, what does polyphony mean to you? And with Korsakoff, you can pull all these clips into whatever interface you want to create. You can have as many windows for video clips as you want. And then but the point with it is that you can set keywords. So if everything has the same keyword, you just get things coming in randomly. And it's not on a timeline. So you start to get a more relational way of thinking, and the clips surprise you. And every time you look at them, you see something new and you start to see new relations. So it's a kind of relational thinking way of working. And then this is an example where one group within our project, we've been working with extreme heat recently, have started to kind of pull out themes and colors and patterns and sort of connecting things up, sort of as a pattern finding exercise. And the other tool is Stornoway, which is Rue Howe is the developer, based in Bristol, also part of our group, has been thinking about these ideas for many years as well. And he has a commercial product that's doing rather well, that's known as the WordPress of interactive storytelling. And it's not as complex in the way it's presented as Korsakoff. And so you can put things, it's a more ordered, structured way of collating materials. So this is an example where people submitted clips from different parts of the world, and then you can put them into chapters and you can start organizing them and putting them together. And then our extreme heat project, here's an example in using Stornoway to start structuring and turning what is actually quite a messy process. Is we've been discussing a lot about the relationship between mess and order, and the order that we're creating with film clips. It's not creating those standard narratives. It's more reflective, more poetic, more thematic, and basically it's opening up a relational practice, which opens up new ways both to think with and to practice with documentary film. So that's just a kind of real skate through what we're doing. But the point is, we're doing it for ourselves, and we're saying we need, you know, what shifts do we need to make within ourselves to navigate the complexities of what's happening around us, to be more, you know, less anthropocentric, you know, more open to other ways of thinking, more able to deal with conflicts, looking more at collaborative, collective processes, rather than having a mindset based on conflict all the time. So I'll stop sharing and see where that takes us.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was a very wonderful presentation, and very profound and very provocative. I want to start with a number of things. Certainly one is software architecture and its integration into this polyphonic practice. But there are other very important issues. And the one I really want to start with is the literary form. It appears to me that novelists and poets and those who work in literary practices are always ahead of the curve in terms of filmmaking. Like filmmakers or moving image artists seems to always be behind the curve. I think there's a lot of interesting innovations taking place in narrative. And you made reference to Nikolai Bakhtin and the dialogic and the relational. And I'd like you to speak a little bit more about that literary relationship to the structuring of a polyphonic practice in documentary.
Mm. So yes, so Bakhtin, I mean, 3 ideas we're working with. He talks about carnival, he talks about heteroglossia, and he talks about aesthetics. And I mean, a key idea, I suppose, is heteroglossia, which is a long word, but basically what he is talking about, he talks about the Russian novel, he talks about Dostoevsky, and he talks about the novel of ideas, and how rather than it being a novel that's, or like in film where you've got the director, we've got the author who's putting everything into the service of the point of view of the author, the polyphonic novel practices heteroglossia in that it gives more space to different characters. And in what we're talking about, characters can be more than human or non-human as well as humans, but it gives more space to allow them to have their own agency and to speak in their own, if we're talking about language, in their own vernacular. And if you're making a film, you can still do that, but you edit things to a single line and then you end up with more of a point of view. Whereas with these polyphonic meshwork type systems, the idea is you can create more breathing space. So you're still authoring. I mean, it might be single or it might be collective authoring, but there's still authorship going on, but it's an authorship that can put different perspectives and different styles of speech and different styles of filming into a more dialogic process. That's the idea. And the carnival idea is just to create safe spaces to explore and try things out. And so the whole thing with our project is we're trying to make it carnivalesque and fun and creative and playful and non-hierarchical. So it should be something that we all enjoy doing, and it's something we come and we do because we're passionate about it and interested in it. So, and aesthetics is just obvious, there's the different aesthetics of the form and the medium and kind of how that plays out through culture and evolving literacies and evolving forms of thinking and communicating.
Okay, so in terms of the actual practice itself, I mean, how is that sort of realized? I mean, how is the polyphonic or the dialogic or even the relational in Bakhtin terms, how does that come together in terms of the people who are working on a single project?
Are you talking about in the novel or are you talking about in our project?
In your project, in the polyphonic documentary project?
Yeah, so what we do is we set a theme. So our first theme was, what does polyphony mean to you? And we asked people who contributed to submit between 3 to 5 clips of no more than 30 seconds using mobile phones, low tech, just kind of making responses to that theme. And now the new theme is extreme heat, based on last summer's record-breaking heat, and also the heat of ideologically polarization. And we get all these clips, we collate them, and we put them in a big pot. Everybody signs their consent forms so that we can remix and use them within the group. And then we then on Discord, so we're using the social media site, we kind of encourage, and through Zoom calls, encouraging people to get into smaller groups and to work with those materials in different ways. And we had workshops with Rue and Florian on Korsakov and Stornoway. We're not limited to those tools, but we've got them to hand and the developers, and because they work differently, they're good things to think with. And then we have meetings and share the different ways of working, and that's what's been so interesting. Different subgroups have responded in very different ways to the same sets of materials, and some have, the people I was working with, we used it more as a tool to think with and to shift our own thinking in that tussle between, oh, this should make sense, and oh, actually let's just see where the materials take our thought processes as they come in randomly. Other groups have marshaled them more and created these rather poetic, beautiful pieces. Florian has been recording our Zoom calls and turning those into Korsakov projects. And so that it becomes really dialogic and interesting, the different approaches and perspectives that we're taking.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So I get the polyphonic form as a kind of like a emerging modality of knowing and doing and of practice in general. I'm interested in exploring how how co-creation rather fits into this polyphonic form, and in particular, what kinds of challenges one might expect, one might encounter in that process.
Okay, so I've thought a lot about this, and I did a talk with Kat Cesek on her big book on collective wisdom for the RAI Film Festival a couple of weeks ago, and also Dorrit and Liz and their launch here at FLEF, and their intervention that co-creation is quite idealistic, and actually more often projects are participatory, but to be genuinely co-creative is really difficult, and because you have to look at power structures. And Kat herself says it's about staying with the trouble. You know, you have to check in with yourself if you want to be non-hierarchical. You have to you have to work at that every day. But I think within what we're doing at the moment is co-creational, because we are working from within a community. So we all come from the IDOCS community, and we have a kind of shared agenda. So at the moment we're doing this for ourselves, and the kind of experiments we're making, you know, there is that desire to make them into something that will speak out to a wider world, but that isn't the point. The point is to experiment and play and shift our own thinking. So I think, I mean, we have to keep working at this, but I think this is quite a co-creative project, although it's me speaking today, you know, rather than the group. I'm hoping there's people in the audience, and we've done round tables that have been much more collective and communal. But then the next, sort of, we're always thinking, you know, where do we go next with this? And one of the things is to relate this back to our own practices on our own projects. And I've got a project where I want to kind of explore with some members of this project what happens when you take these practices into community settings. And then I think probably it becomes more participatory than genuinely co-creative, especially if we get research money and, you know, all those other things. But I think what we're doing at the moment, you know, does feel quite co-creative. So.
Okay, good. And I want to turn to very briefly the software architecture that underpins this whole polyphonic form and makes it possible. You refer to Korsakov as one and Stoneway as the other software program. Could you speak a little more to how you integrate those programs, the software programs, into practice, or how those are introduced into the curriculum in a college, university? I imagine some people might want to find ways to introduce that as a new way of doing work.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as we know, Reece, we've talked a lot about this in terms of the curriculum, in terms of, I mean, I work in a film department, and when we started with IDOCS, the broadcast industry was invested in experimenting with these tools, but they never settled down into a firm business model. So they are, and we talk a lot about this with Patty, that, you know, they are quite disruptive to the business models of the broadcast industry. So if you're teaching in a filmmaking department and you're trying to give your students skills that they can get jobs with, and you're trying to, you know, feed them into partners in the local industry, at the moment, it's a bit problematic, where it wasn't when IDOCS first started, because the industry was interested. And now the industry's moved more towards immersive media, that's, you know, immersive tech. So we've kind of, I talk about these things, but I'm not proactively teaching them as much as I used to. But then there's other, like you've done, you know, you're now doing critical media practice, you know, and built a new department. But the thing is, when I talk to Rue Howe with Stornoway, he talks about direct to consumer, and he says that's a massive market, and actually, you know, on platforms like Steam, and that, you know, his software is getting a lot of interest. So where people say to me, oh, these tools are dead, nobody's using them anymore, that's not true. It just depends what segment of the market you're looking at. And also, I kind of think that culture's shifting. And so young people, there's statistics in the UK that they don't really watch television in the traditional way anymore. They're consuming media in very different ways. So I just think it takes time for these shifts to happen, and you just have to think of appropriate ways. So I'm doing this much more through my research, through my PhD students, got a really vibrant group of PhD students, and also looking at this in a scholarly context. So in climate science, for example, there's a real intention to put indigenous knowledge into dialogue with engineers, with environmental science. And I think these tools could be really helpful for the heteroglossia of different forms of knowledge production and discourse. So I think they've got real power in a scholarly context and also in a community context, but not so much in the mainstream broadcasting world. But that world is going to need to shift because the literacies of our students is shifting. So people will vote with their feet. And as we were talking the other day, the Oscars numbers are down. The world turns, doesn't it? And practices shift. So,
Do you think those softwares can actually enable greater interdisciplinarity, not only in the academy but also in the wider world, in terms of how people work and how they, work globally, not necessarily locally, but globally?
Yeah, well, I mean, if Florin's still in the audience, he'll be itching to speak now because he's got a whole vision about YouTube and how there's lots of really interesting discussion happening outside the academy on YouTube, and that it's a much more relational practice. And I've got an 18-year-old son who's grown up with YouTube, and he questions the kind of way he's being taught biology at the moment. He is aware that that's one way of constructing knowledge, but there are others. And I think it's just a hunch, but perhaps our society is shifting towards a more, call it multi-perspectival or understanding of other interdisciplinary approaches. And there's whole schools and new universities popping up that are doing very interdisciplinary courses, and our faculties just merged with computing and engineering, to try and get those interdisciplinary debates. And I think these tools have a value in that.
I mean, in your experience, do you think there is a move away from consumption and extraction because of the availability of those tools, or because there's just like a general epistemic shift taking place, both within the creative industries, so to speak, but also within the academy?
I mean, I think there's an epistemic shift taking place. There's an awareness that shift needs to take place. And then there's a lag in the kind of systems and structures that are genuinely facilitating that shift. So, people talk about donut economics and, I just think all these ideas are relevant, and why we desperately need these new ways of thinking and working. But it's not about rejecting what's gone before. It's just about complementing. And I mean, I was taught through my PhD that it's like different toolboxes, and the more toolboxes you have, the more pathways to knowledge you have. Then the skill is knowing which tool to use for which context. It's not about outright rejecting one set of tools in order to completely embrace another set. Because I'm not saying linear filmmaking or TV is completely over.
Right.
Remediation, isn't it, for me?
So then how do you think these tools and these practices are working against the kind of, to break apart this ideological polarization that you referenced in your brief overview of the Polyphonic project?
Well, there's a lot of colonization of the industry and the tools going on. So, I mean, that was one of the crises we had within IDOCS, that whenever a new medium comes out, there's the idealistic people, there's the there's the whole San Francisco, culture, the whole Earth Society. And then there's the industry, there's Silicon Valley behind that and the whole industry. And so, there's a problem I mean, there's a problem with social media, with, you know, with all the algorithms that are going on. I mean, what I like about these two tools is they sit outside of that. There isn't an algorithm behind Korsakoff other than what you put into your clips or we put in collaboratively. And Stornoway is the same. It still sits independently of that at the moment. I don't know how, you know, what that will be prone to in years to come, but at the moment it is free from that, and that matters to me. You know, I do TikTok and things like that, and algorithms, yeah, they do concern me. So,
But then the algorithms are very specific to the project. Whatever algorithmic structure is in place works towards a specific project. Is that my understanding correct?
yeah, so in Korsakoff, you literally set your own keywords, and that's the thing, when you can change the keywords, but you're in control. And what's really, Florian's been using it, you know, for 20 years on. We're talking about how it might have changed the way he sees things or practices, and it's really interesting for him to see this, us as a group exploring these tools. You know, he's always asking us, so how does that make you think? And, you know, what has that shifted you? And we're kind of saying, well, yeah, but, you know, maybe I was already prone to that way of thinking beforehand. You know, it's a dance, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So I'm sure there are many thoughts and many questions and comments, but I'd like to open this up to the audience or those who are participating in this event. And any questions that you may have, please start doing so now. And let's have a very dialogic, relational, and polyphonic experience together. Who wants to go first? Any brave soul out there? Any polyphonic sensibilities out there?
Hi.
Yes, please.
Yes, hi. You mentioned a lot about different algorithms and how the algorithms, like for Korsakoff, kind of take in all of these different polyphonic voices. Is there such a thing as too many voices, as too much information, like with stuff in iDocs and Korsakoff? Is there a limit to how many keywords you can use? Is there a limit to how many voices we need to listen to? Or is it truly just endless?
Yeah, good question. So we talk about this with our group, because obviously we want to be open and we want to be inclusive, but also we want it to be manageable. And also if we're co-creating, you know, there's that thing, do we open it out? Because we did some workshops at the Royal Anthropological Institute Festival, and, you know, I'm an anthropologist and geographer by background, so there's a lot of synergy there. And, you know, we want to open this up to other people, but at the same time, we don't want it to become A, unmanageable, and B, like you say, too many voices. And 30 people is a really nice community. And to be honest, there's something really powerful about just going out with a mobile phone and documenting things around you. And because of the pandemic, we were all sheltering in place around the world. And there's something really powerful about sharing aspects of our everyday lives with a community and getting to know each other. And there's something really powerful about filming something in your locality and then putting it into the computer and seeing it reflected back to you. That's powerful as an individual experience, but then as a shared group experience, sharing each other's spaces, it's pretty wild. And but that's because we all know each other, you know, and we're all getting to know each other, and it's quite it's quite an open, like, safe space. It's that carnival, it's that space where we all feel safe to kind of not know stuff and to play. So there is that slight protectiveness of, these are, you know, where would these ideas have traction? And if we just kind of open it up completely, it just becomes I mean, I haven't got enough time as it is, you know. And also, yeah, how many voices do you need for it to be meaningful?
Okay,
So,
thank you so much.
awesome.
The next question is going to come from Siobhan O'Flynn. Hi,
Hello.
Siobhan.
Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you. Lovely to see you here and everyone else. And thank you for this, like, just wonderful intro talk to this project. And I'm actually really curious about something that you mentioned in the context of, like, sort of one of the goals of this project, kind of countering or moving away from an anthropocentric perspective. And so I'm wondering if you can actually speak to how that is being explored in the projects, and also within the context of what I'm very aware of, which is that, you know, the increase of being online also has carbon costs in terms of the environmental impact. And I'm very aware of that in all of these exciting new and old tools that I'm using, which is just burning up, you know, sort of internet energy. So I'm wondering if you can speak to those 2 points. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank
Well, in terms of the anthropocentric, one of the things we noticed with our first project, what does polyphony mean to you? That was, we put out that call just when people were just starting to come out of lockdown. And what we noticed was that there was a real common aesthetic. I mean, the aesthetic, they were messy. The kind of physical aesthetic was very varied and messy, but the conceptual aesthetic, there was a commonality, which was about sheltering in place. And we'd all kind of got our eye in on our locality. And so that was interesting, you know, a lot of musings on trees and on leaves growing, a bit similar to very similar to Sandra's Corona haiku project that was also in lockdown, and sharing each other's, you know, musings of place. And Kathleen Ryan, who she got really excited by the project in I think she's with you, is she, in Colorado?
Yeah, she is, yes.
She'd been filming stuff during lockdown and just thought, well, it's just throwaway. It's not useful for making films with. And suddenly she found a place for this, filming her local marshes and the sky. So that was interesting. And then we have another project which a research bids in, which is a bit complicated, but it's working in a suburb of Bristol where it's a very urbanized place, and it's a place where all the factories are, where all the plastic gets recycled. And we're looking at using computers, making interventions, so around the northern human, around, it's too complicated to explain, but it's kind of energy futures, and looking at that particular area, which is a hotspot for building new nuclear power stations, wind turbines, all the rest of it. And just making some recordings, taking them into the local community centre, showing them to people using this relational Korsakoff approach, eliciting responses, and then using that to start a dialogue in the community and see whether people want to join in or where we can go from there. As I say, there's a lot of thinking and theory behind that I can't begin to start to go into. There's a bit of it in that paper, though, for IFM. So, and yes, the carbon impact. I know. I mean, we're trying to be more climate aware by flying less, but anyone who's an engineer knows that the carbon impact of cooling and the water needed and the energy needed to cool down these massive servers is huge. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but yes, it's not straightforward.
Thank you, Siobhan. Patty,
You're on mute.
you're on mute.
So used to being behind the scenes. Thank you for a great presentation and a really stimulating conversation. You know, one thing I've noticed in the world of co-creation and polyphony and all things multiple is a lot of utopian idealism about how people interact. So I'm going to go to the dark side. And I wonder if you could just share with us some of the problems, challenges, and conundrums that have emerged in this project. And, you know, maybe, you know, I'd be very curious to know what they are and how they were resolved. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, our first intervention around what does polyphony mean to you, to get it started, Stefano and I ended up working with Florian and Rue and kind of making the initial intervention, you know, just to kind of show what was possible. And then that group of around 30 people, I mean, that took, by the time we'd got everyone's clips in, we'd got them all collated, and we got, you know, these things take a lot of time. So, you know, orchestrating or convening doesn't just happen. It takes time and energy and effort. So we did that, and then we held a meeting. And then the people at that meeting, we said, well, should we do another project or should we open this one out? And there was a general sense of let's do a new project. So then we moved on to extreme heat, and that some of the people from the previous project continued and some didn't. And I still feel bad about the people who didn't, who we were supposed to enable them to work co-creatively with the materials, but we weren't able to put so much energy and effort to making that happen because we were putting energy and effort into making the next project happen. So we've kind of left some people behind, and I feel bad about that because that doesn't feel genuinely co-creative, but it's just limited time. So I think time is a big issue, you know, and then just the pressures, you know, because we do work in universities and we do have pressures to deliver. And so you can't always give as much time to things as you'd want to, yeah, because you have to kind of keep your job and do. So yeah, that to me is something that I worry about. I think I feel I've maybe let some people down. They probably don't even care, or, you know, and when we say, oh, we'll meet, we did say we'll meet in January, and then things got really busy, and then Rue was really busy. And we met, you know, last week, you know, it was March by the time we met. And again, I kind of feel, oh God, you know, I'm not delivering. So it's hard, isn't it? Time.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Quilline Meadows, I believe.
Hi. You talked a little bit about connecting on Discord. I was just wondering, how does having constant access to a virtual space and group like that impact your work?
We don't have constant access to it, is the truth. There's times when it is active. There's members of the group that are more active than others. Again, it's really hard to sustain that. And there's people who really want to work with us on the project, but don't really want to have Discord turned on their browser. So to be honest, email is the way of getting out the essential information. And then you put stuff on Discord. Some people see it, some people don't. Some people did use it to kind of organize and find people to work with. Other people ended up using email. So with a stop-start project like this, and with limited time, I wouldn't say Discord has been the panacea. And we're not, you know, some people are very active Discord users. You know, I'm not particularly. I'm not an avid social media user, you know, by choice. So yeah, it's stop-start. It's not ideal, but it's better than Facebook for political reasons. So it's a good platform. But then we've also had to create, for this new project, we've created a private server. So then again, you know, the general channel that the 100 people are on has gone really quiet because we've got this, we're actively working on this project. So kind of making sure we let people know, oh, we're doing stuff and we will be in touch, you know, when we've got stuff to show. It's tricky.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And the next person is Leah Schaefer, but just a quick note, if you have any questions, please keep them as brief as possible so we can have as many voices as heard. Leah?
Thanks. This has been fascinating. I would like to hear a little bit more about the Bakhtinian and the way that it relates to the aesthetics of the projects that you're working on.
Yeah. I wonder if Stefano is, because he's literally been doing something. He has a more semiotic approach and was working. I mean, I've just generally the aesthetics links to cultural manifestations, and our aesthetics are messy, and it's interesting that desire to turn mess into order. And some of us don't mind the mess, and some of us in the group hate the mess and hate the diversity, and that's really interesting. But Stefano,
for bringing me in, Judith.
Hi, Stefano. Hi.
Hi, Reece. Nice to see you. Nice to see you all. Yeah, thanks for the question, Leah. I think, yeah, it's a very good question. We've been thinking about this for a long time now. In terms of when we talk about aesthetics within the project, is more the aesthetics of the interactive side. So the aesthetics of interactivity rather than a more traditional approach, philosophical approach, which is what was put in the chat at the beginning, which is slightly wrong or different from what we do in the project. So the way how we do it, we basically split, we analyze the concept of interactivity in two different ways. One is basically, well, which is pretty much my background in semiotics. The first one is literally what we see. So basically, the feeling that we have when we play with these interactive platforms, emotions and feelings. So that's why some of the people involved in the project work through, pretty much thematic aspects of it, like colors or, movements or whatever. So that's the first stage, which is the purely kind of more traditional aesthetics. The other one is more kind of pragmatic. So what do we do with this? What do we do in terms of interactivity, and what do we do before interacting with the project, during and after? Because obviously we have some expectations when we are starting playing with it. Then we play with it, and then obviously we modify it. So the project, so the actual platform will look different. So in terms of aesthetics, we track this. So that's what we mean by aesthetics of interaction. So it's a little bit more complex in a way, and it's linked to the idea of carnival that Judith mentioned earlier, this kind of place where we can do a little bit of everything, but at the same time, we put some order where we have pretty much just chaos. And that's the way how we approach it.
So sort of the change and the interaction are the aesthetics of the project, the process is what
it's more the process. Yeah, it's about the process itself. So we analyze everything, the project itself, but also the process in terms of the audience, the viewers, the users playing with it.
Cool. Thank you.
Can I say something else? Sorry.
Yes, please. Go on.
I just go back to what, if possible, really 2 seconds, to what Patty said earlier, the question, this kind of dark side. Thanks, Patty, for the question. It was very, very, spot on. We had many problems in general, and Judith listed them, very well, especially time. Time was one of the main ones, and especially in terms of sustainability and managing this project, which is very difficult, obviously. In terms of one of the main issues for me was the idea of, people being intimidated by the technology, because obviously it's a wide community. Not, everyone is familiar or is, good enough in a way with this technology software. So I guess with the first set of iterations, we had some problems in that sense. People were a bit of intimidated, of getting their kind of hands dirty and playing with it. So we had to step in and do it somehow ourselves. For the second set of interaction, we saw a lot of more, proper participation in this sense of people playing with it, because what we did, we ran a series of workshops in between. So proper workshops with both Rue Stornoway and Florian Korsakov. So I believe those workshops help people to get a little bit more confident, get closer to the software, and then start playing with it in a more active way. So that was the difference between the two, and that's how we acted in terms of fixing that issue.
And it's brilliant having the 2 developers as part. That's been really good. But that we've had to have a little bit of funding to be able to do that, and our funding's run out now, so we've got to find some more.
Yeah, it runs out today.
Literally, yeah. But we're not done yet, are we? We're just getting started.
Good. Thank you, Stefano. Any more questions or comments from participants in this platform? Let's see.
Right, you might be able to ask something, Reece.
Oh,
here's Amir. He's got his hand up.
Okay, good. Amir, you're on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I have trouble turning on my camera, it says that I'm unable to start video. I have no idea why. So I'll just continue like this. Hi, Judith. Thank you for that. Hi, Stefano. I have a question, and it's something that we discussed before at some of the events, previous events, and it's something I keep. Oh, it looks like I can start now. There we go.
Hey, nice to
Hi.
see you.
Good to see you too. It's something that we've discussed before, and something I keep running into also when I teach, and specifically in an interactive documentary course that I've been teaching. And it's really the preservation of a lot of this work. Even with Korsakov projects, I've been running into the problems that amazing projects that remain. There's a lot of labor here that kind of goes poof once the supporting technology is not there, or when we can't pay the server to host a lot of this. And I'm just concerned about this also with my own work. I've worked with Adobe Flash and ActionScript and so on, kind of trying to bring in these kind of polyphonic projects together. And as you said, there's a lot to be done. A lot of labor goes into this. And I'm just wondering how you've approached this going forward, and whether it's something that, is on your mind. I know it's a completely maybe different subject to talk about preservation of these digital.
It's relevant
works.
though.
But,
I mean, it's very much on our minds. And we're kind of, Rue was asset manager for BBC here in Bristol for many years. So he's a really good project manager, and he kind of really understands computer software. So I'm kind of hoping that, he's got some robust answers to that question for Stornoway. For Korsakov, I mean, it's the software that's survived, where every other piece of software has fallen by the wayside, but it doesn't mean it's going to survive every upgrade. So you need to use it in Firefox now, and you need to tweak something to make it work. So there's always that living in fear that, it won't kind of survive. But at the moment, because we're using it as a tool to think with and to shift our thinking, it's good. And because these projects we're not investing, we're not making, well, actually some of us probably are making rather beautiful works of art, but that's the point is how it's shifting our thinking, how it's a tool that's available and that's good to think with and work with. But we're working with Franzi Vidal, who's written a book of Trees and Clouds. This is a PhD on Korsakov, and she's part of our project, and she's part of our research bit. And when she kind of she talks about building on Adrian Miles's work at RMIT in Australia, and she talks about computational correspondence and as a form of corresponding with the computer that takes you into a kind of more than human agency, where the computer has agency. And also you can use that of Trees and Clouds as a sort of non-anthropocentric way of looking at things. And I mean, she has so much knowledge that she brings to the project, and so much in-depth understanding of Korsakov. And we're talking about using it to do diffractive ethnography and building on Karen Barard's ideas. And so we are invested in it, and we just hope, I mean, we are talking to people. I've got a good friend from the anthropology world who runs the human resource area files in America, who's a complete computing whiz. And I keep thinking I must get back in touch with him to ask for his advice on this, because he'll know, he'll completely get what we're doing, and he'll know. I just hope he'll have an answer. But if anybody knows, he will, of what tools are out there.
Yes,
Right.
Reece was also running the digital preservation project at some point, and with the web recorder. And I know there were some interesting developments there, but I haven't really followed up.
I can add to that, because there was a conference on interactive documentary in Lucerne a few weeks ago, and they've got a big Swiss Science Foundation grant to study interactive documentary. It's where Florian is a research associate now. And Jimmy, can't remember your surname, from the National Film Board of Canada, came to the conference. And Mike Robbins was there, who is, a big creative tech person. And literally we saw various flash projects, big flagship flash projects from NFB coming back to life in front of our eyes. And it was
amazing.
It was the way, because I actually had been through it sounds silly, but I'd been through a process of grieving for all these projects
Same.
that I'd invested in. You know, our book, IDOCS, The Evolving Practices, talks about these seminal projects, and they don't work
Okay.
anymore, but they do. They're
Okay.
with Rhizome, 90% of them work again.
Thank you so much. This is the point in the session where we move to the takeaways from the participants. Any takeaways, any kind of notions of the path forward, any issues or problems or challenges that you see may want to share. Now is the time to do so.
So is that me, or?
Oh, that's for the entire group.
I just saw
of folks.
Siobhan's comment. Flash docs are NFB docs are running again. It's wild. They are. You have to kind of do it before Flash was switched off, though. So any of our Flash projects, unfortunately, it's too late. But they've saved theirs, apart from Fort McMoney. And a few
Right.
others.
I mean, maybe I could just point out, I think one of the major takeaways of this conversation and the wider conversation about polyphonic forms and co-creative practices is that a fundamental shift is taking place within the ecosystem of practices, right? And the kinds of work that you're doing, I think, presents a model for intervention in the academy, right, of shifting the way in which we teach students about moving images or how they can produce moving images away from this model of, as I put it, consumption and extraction to something more carnivalesque in the kind of Bakhtian kind of sense, if you like. So for me personally, that's one of the major takeaways from this conversation, right? And it's quite refreshing, right? Because people like me kind of, emerge out of the kind of more linear form and not always linear, but we kind of work within that framework and try to experiment with that as much as possible. But back in the day, we did not have these kind of technologies that would enable us to do the kinds of things that you and your colleagues are doing, which is innovative and forward-looking. So that's, for me, that's one of the major and kind of heartening things about these technologies and these practices, and bringing those technologies into conversation with the literary forms, but also with a new kind of philosophical perspective and like a new way of being in relation to moving images, relation to production, and not necessarily consumption, because I don't like that word very much, but really experience, how one experiences images and songs and, the kinds of journeys one can take.
And I find when I get the chance to talk about this stuff with my students, they are very open to it, but they don't know that they're allowed to think in these ways. I found there's real rigidity in education about students being kind of streamlined into certain ways of thinking and behaving in the academy. And you need to peel back. It doesn't take much to peel back that layer and to actually say to them, what, dialogic, what do you think? Let's have a dialogue. Where are you coming from? How do you consume media? What fires you up? And it's there. It's just they don't always know that they're allowed to talk about it, and they aren't always, that's the tussle. For me to bring these dialogic practices into our teaching and into
Is this your key takeaway? Is this your key takeaway from this project?
And to bring it into our engagements with the industry as well, that we can all. Patty always says, this is unresolved, and it's embracing uncertainty and not being afraid of not having the answers, and being able to play and explore. And that kind of creative process seems to me to be essential, like design thinking, essential for how we move forwards, because we're all dealing with uncertainty. We've all got to improvise. We've all got to find new ways to do things. If we just, as Olga Tokarczuk says, a lot of the narratives are anachronistic and they're not fit for purpose anymore. And if we fall back on those, we're going to fall back into nationalism and all the rest of it, and being entrenched. You say that stone's green, I say it's grey, never the two shall meet. Whereas actually maybe it's green and it's grey, and maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it can be both. And that way of thinking might be helpful. So that would be my takeaway. But you know, how do we
Absolutely.
get that into our teaching practices? I think it's essential, but it's not
Absolutely.
straightforward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Leah?
so much, Judith. Thank you, Reece, for this fantastic, illuminating conversation, especially your takeaways. Both of you, I think, really wrap this up in a way that makes us think about the way the future can be vibrant and polyphonic. So let us all unmute ourselves and give our speakers a round of applause for their wonderful contributions to FLEF today.
Thank you. Thank you to Flair.
Thank you, Flair. Thanks everybody
Yeah.
for organizing this event.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure talking to Reece.
It's always been a pleasure talking to you too.
We're quite aligned, aren't we?
Yes. Thank you.
Well, I've just seen there's John he was one of the first projects. He's one of the ones I feel.
All right, there we are.
Great.